All right, hi guys. Good to see you out there. Eventually, if anybody shows up, the ticker always starts at zero. Story of life. So, yeah, what do I want to really cover tonight? Guess what? More confusion out of Iran, and we get to discuss that. Oh yes, lots of confusion. Brinksmanship. Right. Okay. Cool. So, word up on a Saturday night, guys. Here I am. So the I have to start with Iran again, only because the only way to describe what has happened is it's been goofy. Talks are off, they're on again. Israeli and Hezbollah work something out, and then they start bombing each other. And then Iran jumps in and says this wasn't part of the deal, blah, blah, blah. Who knows what to believe? Meantime, you have Hormuz. Who's really in control in Hormuz? Iran says they are, and CENTCOM says they are. And let's go to the videotape, okay? The argument is that if you actually look at the satellite videos, the satellite feed, you can see ships moving through the Strait of Hormuz very nicely. However, the part that I'm still a little confused about is that those bug boats. Iran still has those bug boats. Now, fine, the channel may be on the Oman side of the strait. That doesn't really put them out of range of the bug boats, but it makes it harder for Iran to get involved. But I would say count on some, well, I'm going to say it, desperate measures on the part of Iran to stir things up and create the impression that somehow they control Hormuz. In the meantime, I'm going with the CENTCOM version and reports of ships moving freely through the strait, okay? And then the other part, of course, is the talk about how Iran is loading up a lot of oil tankers, sending them on their way. All that oil has been sitting around for the last, 2 months almost. Got to go, but are they going to make it? And it's funny, with all the other talk, I haven't heard much about restoring the blockade, but I have a funny feeling they're going to do that. So it's called stay tuned for more news about this, but it remains a confused mess. And there's one word I really want to use for this whole thing, and it all points to Donald Trump. That one word is brinksmanship. Now, if you're not familiar with the word brinksmanship, it basically means pushing things to the limit, taking a situation to the edge, testing people's wills and inclination to the limit. And this has certainly been the position in which President Trump has found himself. And I don't know, I'm inclined to give him a lot of high marks for how he's handled this. This has so many moving parts that it could easily go sideways. And the fact that Iran has really made it clear that they're going to continue to be a supporter of terrorism in the region can't go down well by any measure. But the part I don't quite understand is why there isn't a stronger response from the other countries. There should be some banding together. There should be, a NATO equivalent of these Gulf countries willing to, put it to Iran one way or another. Now, yeah, if I said NATO-like, I guess I'm implying the United States would need to be part of it too. Yes, I would say that. I mean, all of that said, there was a person on the news today who made a very good point. He presented himself as a conservative, okay, and the first general historical point that he wanted to make is that invading countries do not have a great track record with Iran, or what would have been called Persia. That said, we know that Persia doesn't have such a great track record with Greece, and that's another discussion. So they're given this history where many countries have tried to, quote, take over Iran and have failed. That's that's a cautionary historical lesson for us. We should pay attention. I think the gentleman may have a point. And that's tough because I'm with the people who say, boots on the ground, we need to go the distance if we're going to fix this. But if our prospects for success are not that good, then maybe we have to rethink that. And rethinking it is what President Trump seems to be doing every single day. So here's a funny thought. How President Trump thinks about Iran yesterday was different from the day before, different from the day before that, and different from the day before that. In part because the so-called leadership is so confused internally. I think he's constantly having to rethink some things. And so the part that's important is that he has the capacity to rethink these things. Which is, I guess, part of his transactional nature is to look at this and say, well, what I thought last week might work, now it doesn't look like it may work so well. So let's go back to the drawing board. And that's I mean, and at the same time, he has stuck with the things that have worked, keeping pressure up, keeping the blockade up. The talk about dropping the blockade, I have a feeling it's very temporary, very temporary. So I think there's a level at which we can expect this crap to pile up again. But I will tell you, I mean, just my own concern, the thing I think about a little bit is the claim that there's still a lot of mines in the Strait. Now, the Navy has apparently cleared a path with a channel on the Oman side, but it doesn't take away from the fact that there are many other types of mines out there, including some that, drift towards their targets. I think the Navy knows that. They've got this, I'm sure they've got it well in hand, but I, like an armchair expert, just sit here and wonder, okay, and wonder some more. Okay, the Brinksmanship part is what I find most curious because, again, he has to deal with the problems that Bibi Netanyahu is presenting to him. And so he has to go back, get into this back and forth with him and try to sort of keep a lid on trying to negotiate. So here's the key question, another key question, which we've talked about. How long can he keep this up? How long can we have Iran in the Straits, have these phony peace talks, have the kinds of things that are going on in the background, and somehow end up where? In a better place? I don't see it. It's just there are too many complicating factors. But hey, you never know. You never know. And so all right. I guess I want to take advantage of the uncertainty here. Again, I go to the people in the street. We've seen a few uprisings, but nothing that's turned into anything substantive. The point was also made that the Kurds, the Iraqi Kurds, Iraqi Kurds and Iranian Kurds do not have enough manpower to be a factor in any kind of resistance against the IRGC. So there's that. The fact that the people in Iran don't have any weapons of their own, that's a problem. You don't have a gun culture to speak of in Iran. So when it comes down to pulling people together and getting them to think in terms of fighting back, if they don't know how to use rifles and pistols, that you're getting into, a lot of what we'll call tactical problems in order to operate. Now, there's this group called the, I'm sorry, what was the term for them? The Immortal, that's it, the Immortal Guards. So we hear about the Immortal Guards from time to time. And I guess I get the impression that, great, there is a small determined group that is willing to fight to the death against the existing regime. But that's just it. They're small. They're being propped up as much as possible by whatever, paramilitary we have in the country, but even that doesn't seem to be good enough. There's like a critical mass that has to be achieved if there's going to be any kind of significant, even significant guerrilla warfare. Just to review it, there are certain rules. If you have an army and you're confronting an army, then your strategic option is to be able to confront them head on. Instead, if that's a full army and all you have is a division, then you're limited to a flanking action. And if you don't even have a division, it's a smaller number, well, then you're restricted to a guerrilla warfare against an occupying army. And that's kind of where we are in Iran. And that's it's great. It's almost heroic when you look at things like this, but it gets you nowhere unless there's some follow-on to it. And is one of the common problems when you have guerrilla actions, aka special operations, commandos, Delta Force, the SEALs, whoever. They're always putting themselves out there in a very risky position. And they're always running the risk of getting into deep trouble. Okay, watching from work tonight. Okay, Alan. Hey, whenever you want to pitch in, make some tempting remarks. So I don't know if you have an opinion on Iran. It's so I'm just carrying on about this because we see, right now I think there's a feeling that there's been a certain amount of drawing back based upon what was happening last week, and a part of it is because of the chest beating by the Iranians. The other thing, all right, I was kind of talking down the idea of a guerrilla warfare, and there may be good reasons for it, okay? And I think the people who are in the middle of trying to execute something like that would probably agree with me. Doesn't mean they aren't working on it, but they're nowhere near what they need in order to, shall I say, stage brilliant attacks. We haven't seen the kind of clever attacks in Ukraine against Russia that we might see here in Iran. Another point I need to bring up, and one, for us in America to look at Iran, it's like, why are we putting up with this? We put up with it for 47 years, and you forget that while we were highly active in Iraq, we lost something like, depending upon who you're talking to, 1,000 to 2,000 American soldiers to Iranian IEDs, okay? It's as good a reason as any to hate Iran, and this is why Trump, Trump 45, had killed Soleimani. Soleimani was the primary architect for these efforts to kill Americans in Iraq. So they remember, see, we have a deal with a terrorist regime who's well known for lying, cheating, and is unlikely to keep the deal. And I think President Trump knows that very well. And it throws you in a difficult position, because if I want to go back to the argument that we don't have a good history of countries being able to successfully invade Iran, then as much as we may hate them, as much as we may revile what they've done to our American soldiers who are in Iraq, the way things are disposed right now, we're not in a position to do anything effective, right? The other funny thing is that I've been listening to these people carry on, and I'm hearing more and more people adopting this attitude that we have to accept that we're not going to be able to execute regime change. When you look at the history of Iran, it's either a monarchy, some other authoritarian government. There was a time, though, it was in the early 1900s when they had worked to form a constitutional government. If we cannot be affected, then why get involved in the first place? Yeah, I would say, Alan, that you need to have a more subtle approach to these problems, because you don't think so much in terms of A leads to B. If we attack, invade, and we're successful, then we have the following conditions. Sometimes you have to think in terms of how what you do can influence others. So maybe you don't control them, but you can certainly influence them. And I think you'd agree that that is the nature of politics. You have people constantly working on members of Congress to get them to vote the way they want. So you have all these conflicting voices living inside the head of the legislator. And there's, if you're going to persuade the person, you have to think in terms of not being victorious, not overwhelming them, not taking control of them. The idea of persuading them has to be more subtle. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of the way I look at that problem. Yeah. So many other things here. Let me just see if I can pick up a couple things for you. What conflict? We have the unified Democrats and the useless rhino. Yes, this is an old theme. That's America for you. Well, there is something I have to share with you later, Alan. It's something we've talked about for a long time. But when I show it to you, I think you're going to feel happy. All right. So just to shift gears for a minute, England's a mess. Iran's a mess. Lebanon's a mess. But the mess in England is particularly bad. We've had these terrible scandals over grooming gangs and how Keir Starmer's administration has done everything they can to tamp it down and distract people away from it when these horrible things are being done to women. What is it? The statistic is supposedly something like 250,000 women raped and assaulted by these gangs primarily over the last 10 years. That's unbelievable for a country their size. I guess if you wanted to equate it to America, that would be the same as over 1 million. Well over 1 million women being assaulted and raped in this country. And I think we would have a few things to say about that. All right. So it seems that Keir Starmer is partially responsible for enabling these rapes and assaults on British women. Some leader he has turned out to be, right? All right. So now it looks like he's got to go. But now there's this talk. I think his name is Burnham, Ken Burnham. Dan Burnham. He's sort of come out of retirement, and I think it's the Labour Party. Let's see. I want to make sure I got my facts right here. Burnham, candidate for PM in UK. Okay. Andy Burnham. Okay. So the question here asked one day ago is, who is Andy Burnham? And could he replace Keir Starmer? So he's the Greater Manchester mayor and Labour candidate. Now he's managed to leap some political barriers in terms of elections and qualifications. So there's a sense that he's this Andy Burnham guy is moving inexorably towards taking over for Keir Starmer. Now, between you and me, Keir Starmer, good riddance. Never want to see him, never want to hear from him again. But in exchange for getting rid of him, I fully expect that all these injustices that have been visited upon the British people will be addressed in some serious manner. All these crazy laws that they've passed, basically against themselves, will be eliminated, and you'll return to a sane form of civil governance. Just a dream, that's all. So that's what I would hope to see. He was the Crown prosecutor who chose not to try these cases. Yes, there you go. Well, some choice. I think the standard explanation is the British didn't want to appear racist when they're going after these Pakistani gangs, but it's not about race, as they say. It's about culture. It's about cultural values and the law. And to sit around and worry about political optics when young women are being assaulted is you've lost your mind. There is no reason that a person like that should be in a position of governance or authority to make important decisions affecting people's lives. But there it is. There you have it. And I shouldn't complain so much because you know what? In America, you could say we have a similar problem. When you look at our public education system, so much of it is driven by fear of being called a racist. This whole DEI CRT thing, it's still around because people are not willing to look at cultural things and not see them as racial or racialist or racist. I can sit here and talk all I want about how they're not looking at these situations correctly, and I'm afraid that'll be falling on deaf ears. Supposedly there's some sensibility sinking in, but we're not seeing a lot of evidence of it. It's kind of disappointing. Anyway, so there's that. So Keir Starmer may be gone by Monday. How do I feel about that? Maybe I feel relieved. We'll see. Right. What is the other thing here? Oh, yeah.
Hey, Dad.
Hey, Michael. Right, there he goes in Hogwarts Academy. He's busy going back to Hogwarts there. Yes, my son the wizard. How do you like that? What's the part we want to focus on here? Well, I want to talk about this too. President Trump, I talked about brinksmanship. I have another example of brinksmanship. Can you think of any president who has ever done anything like what I am about to describe? It is just brilliant. So how did this start? He nominated wild man Bill Pulte, who was watching over Ginnie Mae and Freddie Mac, gigantic financial institutions for the real estate market. And then he decided, well, Tulsi said she's got to go, so we got to find somebody to replace her at DNI. And so Bill Pulte already had a reputation for being a go get it done kind of guy. So he said, you're our man. But because he doesn't have a lot of direct experience in national intelligence, of course, the deep state had a deep fit and didn't want him. Okay. So after a little rummaging around, he found this guy named Clayton, who's a DA, I guess, or assistant prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. And he said, okay, Senate, I'm going to nominate that guy. However, since you guys are a little slow on taking my nominations, I will have to appoint somebody in a temporary spot for DNI. Hey, I think I'm going to pick Bill. Screw you. So there you go. That, I think, is just brilliant, right? He takes the very person they hate and rejected, and because they rejected him, he had to start another process, but because that process is going to take so long and is so tortuous and uncertain, well, he still needs a temporary person in his place, so let's pick Wild Man Bill. This is going to be exciting because he's already made it clear that when he steps in there, he's going to clean house. So it's a funny thing. You've had deep state types complain because we're basically gutting. He also got around the McConnell-Thune roadblock because he has already had a hearing. Okay, good point as well. Yes. But again, President Trump understood how to use the rules and work around the system to get what he wants. Brilliant. So the next brilliant move, and by the way, this Thune guy, Thune, he's got to go. All right. It is possible to hold an election. What does it take? 24, 25 Republicans to dump him? Yeah. So the problem, if I remember correctly, was when you had the quote election in the Senate for who would be the Senate Majority Leader. There was Rick Scott, one other person, and him, and I'm pretty sure that Thune got more than 24, 25 votes to be elected into that position. So getting rid of Thune may be problematic, but I agree. Everything that needs to be done has to be done because He is, in fact, an enemy of Trump, and as far as I'm concerned, he's an enemy of the state. You might as well call him a traitor. And Exhibit A is the Save America Act. The resistance that he has put up with that, the games that he has played, the kinds of crap that he's put out when the press asks him questions about the Save America Act are just appalling, just appalling. And still he's there. And so when you add to that, just what is it, 90%, 85% of Americans want the SAVE Act, including a huge number of Democrats, and he chooses to still ignore them. Can we just take a minute and be suspicious? All right? I think we're entitled to being suspicious. This is a joke. All right, I can only hope that pressure like what President Trump has put on him, such as saying, if you don't pass the Save America Act, I am not going to sign the FISA Act. All right, so meantime, though, I'm led to believe that the Senate Republicans still have other countermeasures of their own, so this battle is going to go on. It's a classic case of Brinksmanship. Maybe that's the theme for tonight. And you can be sure that Trump is going to play him out as long as he can. And there's another thing I want to throw in about President Trump that I've begun to wonder about. There is this game that he plays. We've seen it now with the peace deal. Several times now he's threatened that he was going to, pull out all the stops and really do it to Iran. And then at the last minute, change his mind. But how would he change his mind? He'd get a phone call. Yes. Well, the leader of Qatar called me up, and he really made a persuasive case as to maybe I should wait and just give peace a chance. And so I'm very thankful to the prime minister from Qatar for making that call. Or, I don't know, maybe not so much this in case. Or, well, Bibi gave me a call about X, Y, and Z, and, he was right. So I guess we're going to suspend what we're doing. All right, on the one hand, you listen to this and you're going, what the hell is he doing listening to these people? Come on. They don't have anything to offer in this. Yet he does it. So I offer the following, ladies and gentlemen. They're called political IOUs. Okay? In a sense, he did a favor for the leader of Qatar, and even in some cases with Bibi. And in the near future, there'll come a time where President Trump will have to call that shit in. Okay? So I would say there is that element going on. And it's just, I don't know. I mean, what do I know? But I think it's just brilliant, these kinds of things that he's doing. Yeah, so let's see if I can find another thing that was of high concern here. Let me just to go back for a moment. Yeah. So as a final act, Tulsi Gabbard had released all this information, really raising our level of suspicion about the kinds of lying that Fauci has done. And I think the main feature of this revelation that came out, Friday, was that Fauci had sworn in testimony that he had not talked with intelligence officials at all with respect to COVID. And now it turns out that he did. And the receipts are all there. And then she brought them out for everybody to see. So on a fundamentally important question like, have you talked to the CIA and others about COVID? He denied it, but he did. Yeah, well, we're waiting for a referral. There's got to be a criminal referral in here somewhere. A lot of people have said, too mighty, too powerful, too influential to go to jail. But there's such a rich collection of offenses committed by Fauci that it's hard to see how he could be, it could be anything other than putting him in jail, even though he is in his 80s. I mean, it's just, What he did is inexcusable. And in fact, if you remember the book by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., The Truth About Fauci, about Anthony Fauci, there is certainly enough in there to realize that he is quite fundamentally a despicable human being, and a despicable human being with not very good judgment. So for me, one little small point about him back then was that there was considerable evidence about the benefits of vitamin D as a prophylactic to lower the risk of COVID transmission. And he never went there, never mentioned it, never talked about it, didn't even refute it, but the clinical evidence was there. So when I saw that he wasn't even touching that, that's when I first started to get suspicious. But we've had, along the way, we've all had points in time where we could see that something was clearly not right as far as that was concerned. And since I've mentioned Fauci, I'm going to talk about vaccine confusion. All right. Part of the reason there is so much confusion over vaccine safety is because the thresholds and the statistical standards for vaccine safety are complex, and they are, how do I want to put this? Unclear, all right? Because you can take, say, a certain set of side effects associated with vaccination, but then when you take a closer look at them, they tend to be temporary. They go away, all right? People recover. And so there's a tendency to say, well, given what we see as the benefit of this vaccine, we should be okay with some of these side effects. Other cases, not so much, And then there's this whole other area here that's really hard to nail down. The 4 A's, as they call them, right? So you got asthma, allergies, autism, and attention deficit disorder. And there is an argument, I wouldn't say that it's persuasive, but you're going to hear Robert F. Kennedy Jr. push it pretty strong, that it will turn out that further research about the safety of vaccines will show that there is a definite connection between those vaccines and these conditions, or the growing prevalence of these conditions. Again, jury's out. The work needs to be done. So no judgments are to be drawn yet about this. We just have to be patient. The only problem I'm hearing, though, is that there's a lot of back and forth about whether or not something should be done. For whatever reason, it seemed that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had backed off for a while, and it was a function of certain people who were influencing him. And I think on this ACIP, was it called? I can't remember. There had been some people who shouldn't be there, but they were there, and eventually they had to go. But, who else is there? I mean, believe me, Big Pharma is pulling out all the stops on this one, where they don't want to have the kind of regulations being discussed. Yeah, so that's another complex, messy area. I'll just leave it at that. So let me just pick on a couple of other things here that should be noteworthy. Right, yeah. Okay, let's see. No. See, progressives ask academia to enlighten us on what jokes and comments are socially acceptable. Socially acceptable according to who, dude? Anyway, if also in the news, if you noticed, there was a video clip that had caught this gentleman who is responsible for ripping up some of the blue paint off the bottom of the reflecting pool for the Lincoln Memorial. Well, when you look at it, my first reaction was, hey, look, it's a fellow old hippie. There he is, wearing his helmet, riding on his bicycle. Okay, so by whatever circumstances, he decides to jump into the reflecting pool and rip out some of the blue paint, because it would have been like a latex, so it was like a sheet. You could pull it up. And he got a pretty big swath as it was. But no time was wasted in arresting that dude. So we're glad to say that justice was being done pretty quickly there. However, I have to throw in another name, Hoggard. That would be Mr. Hoggard. Mr. Hoggard is a gentleman who lives in Middletown, Connecticut, and he has been attempting to run for office. But however, it has turned out that he's a firm believer in the power of fraud. And afraid he got caught. Got with some forgery, caught lying 6 times, a few other things. So this is one of the few cases, oh my goodness, few, in Connecticut where the SEC had to say, yep, we're going to have to refer this one to criminal justice. Yep, all right. So Mr. Hoggard, I think you may be spending some time in jail because of what you did. Now, I want to throw in another one because I have a feeling this gentleman's been around for a while. I think we're going to find out that Mr. Hoggard has been involved in questionable activities in Middletown politics for quite some time. That he got caught now in this case, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Just saying. Him and Wanda, birds of a feather. Okay? So we'll find out if that turns out to be true. Couldn't believe it when I read it, but it's just, all right. Anybody who's going to be listening to this later and you happen to live in Connecticut, I'm telling you right now, people need to organize and bear down, okay? Bear down on our system of election management. It is pathetic, okay? I mean, just to give you one example, now it's, oh boy, it's rant time. It's rant time. Ready, Alan? It's rant time. All right, Matthew Wagner. That would be the gentleman who is the Democrat registrar in the town of Fairfield, caught erasing signatures that would be used for absentee ballots. He would take the information out, strip out the signature information, and then put it back into the record again. I don't know. That sounds like a felony to me. Sounds like that boy belongs in jail. But nope, he's Ned's boy, so he was well protected. Okay, and that's just the beginning. Now, even better than that, what happened on a particular Saturday afternoon in Fairfield, Connecticut at Town Hall? Yep, what the hell was he doing in the room with the machines? Yep, what was he doing? Fiddling around with the machines. Yep, he got discovered, and the Republican registrar said, that's it. We're changing the locks. You are banned from this area, totally 100%. You never come here again, although it doesn't mean he won't try again. This guy just seems to be on automatic when it comes to sabotage and fraud, all right? And that's Connecticut. So don't tell me there's no election fraud in Connecticut. And for the audience, I just remind you, there she was, Christina Ayala, prosecuted, found guilty in September 2015 on 19 counts. That's right, count them, 19 counts of election fraud, of voter fraud. One person committing 19 separate cases of voter fraud is not just making stupid mistakes. They're on a mission. Now, there's just one problem with Ms. Ayala. She was a state representative out of Bridgeport. Oh, that's right, a Democrat, I forgot to mention. And her mother? Oh, that's right, her mother, yeah, is a registrar for the Democrats for the city of Bridgeport. Okay, so that's called keeping it in the family. All right, so this is the same city where we had a little question about Wanda's activities. And I just want to emphasize that this is an example of how creative Democrats continue to be when it comes to committing election fraud, because they know that eventually we'll figure out one form of fraud. Now, once we nail that down, now they got to find another way to do it, and another, and another. And so it just seems that they are a problem everywhere we turn when it comes to election fraud, and that's why more people need to engage in a watchdog function against these creeps in our state. Just saying. So what else would I like to jump on here? Right. Interesting. So this headline says banning hospitals certain contracts could save Americans $45 billion, report finds. So I just want to remind you, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that it's somewhere around 25 cents of the healthcare dollar for part one, okay, is that we're at a point now where 20% of America's GDP is spent on healthcare, all right? That's a pretty big number. And I'm pretty sure if we compare that with other countries, we would find that they don't spend nearly as much money on healthcare. So then we move to the other problem. How much? What is the healthcare dollar spent on? Well, it turns out, so you got doctors, you got medicine, you got surgery, you got nurses, you got hospitals. Okay. Well, it turns out that 25 cents, probably more, of every healthcare dollar is spent on paperwork, or what they call administration. That would be roughly double what the administrative costs are for Switzerland, Germany, even France. Okay. So for some reason, we are phenomenally inefficient when it comes to paperwork. And I think the reason for all that paperwork is because healthcare in this country is overregulated. Now, that's a hell of a thing to say, given that a place like England is supposedly a single payer system, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So it's, so there's a lot to fix. Now you add to that all the fraud that has come to light in Medicare and Medicaid just in the last several months. Thank you, Nick Shirley. It's so vast that we're still sorting it out. Okay. So then a headline like this comes along and says, well, gee, if you just tightened up on contracts, you might save Americans $45 billion a year in healthcare costs. All right, I don't have to tell you, $45 billion is, that's right, a drop in the bucket. We've got bigger fish to fry than certain kinds of contracts. You've got all these people that need to be brought to justice who have in one way or another exploited our healthcare system and taken advantage of it, especially through these non-governmental organizations. Just mind-blowing. And I'll tell you, this raises another question. If we have this huge tangled jungle, this ecology that we call healthcare in America, and then a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. comes along and wants to say, Maha, how does that get worked out? It's not going to be easy. There's a lot of, what I would call backtracking that needs to be done. Repealing laws is not a popular pastime in this country. But if we're going to get costs under control, okay, if we're not going to have people living on the edge of poverty whenever something goes wrong medically, there's going to have to be a lot of repealing. All right. So, that's our thought for the future as far as healthcare is concerned. And what else would I like to pick on? Let's see here. Well, this was a tough one. There's a video I just watched a few minutes ago. It says the Pied Piper applied to today's adults. So it's this woman carrying on about how, remember the folk tale of the Pied Piper and how now I believe there was a conflict in the early part of this story and he warned the parents that he would take their children away. So he basically would play this music that would enchant the children and led them out of town. So the short version. So her case is, well, what about the idea of a Pied Piper for adults? It's a funny thought, but I think it's a very correct thought. The reason being that we are seeing more and more examples of people who are easily misled, dare I say Antifa, BLM, okay, and all this other crap that's going on, and that we have an educational system that says one thing and does another when it's about critical thinking. And the reality is that graduates of our public education system are less and less critical thinkers with each passing year. Well, guess what? If they become less capable of critical thinking, then they're going to be more reliant on, quote, social cues about whether or not they should disagree with something or someone. And that was basically the point in this video. So what she didn't hammer on was the fact that we have an educational system that's degrading before our very eyes. And as the graduates become less knowledgeable and capable, they are more easily misled. They're more easily seduced. They're more easily propagandized. So we shouldn't be surprised then that we get these social movements. And, another person had made the point that the dumbing down of education has played in directly to the growth of social activism. So this becomes an interesting dilemma. And if I may just take a few minutes, I have pondered, have I pondered, yes, I have, about the issue of social justice in education. There's a level at which you could look at this and simply say, well, it's another paradigm. It's another model for how kids can become educated. And I've made up an excuse for them. So all you social justice warriors should feel happy about this, because the history of academia is to provide knowledge, learning, understanding. But that's it. Now you have all this knowledge. What do you do with it? How do you use it? How do you make it useful to society? Well, that's kind of left up to you as an individual. But those in the school system are sitting there saying to themselves, well, maybe the way we teach should be directed at getting results that address the ills of our society. And there's no ill greater than racism. So we'll build up all these social justice ideas around our attack on racism. Hello, Ibram Kendi. What a dummy. So that's where we find ourselves. So again, I think in an effort to be positive and, quote, nice to these people who are destroying our education system, I would posit this good intention. And like other good intentions, it's the road to hell. All right. It's the road to hell by putting out students who know less, think less, are less curious, less capable of tackling difficult subjects. And you know what? Less literate. So let's not be surprised. I was having a discussion the other day. So here's this town, calling my favorite target, Guilford, Connecticut. Yes, good old Guilford, Connecticut. They have been sort of caught in the crosshairs. That would be my crosshairs, as concerns how well they're teaching their kids. And I've certainly seen enough evidence to suggest that the Guilford public school system is in a state of decline. One of the things as a marker for that is that we have this thing called the U.S. News and World Report that likes to rank every single school in the country. So, for example, in Connecticut, we have, in round numbers, roughly 150 school districts. And every year, U.S. News and World Report say this, like Greenwich is number 1, Darien is number 2, New Canaan's number 3, Westport's number 4, etc. And they just go on down. So now you get to the bottom. And, Stanford, 140, Bridgeport, 150, Hartford, 149. And they just, and a large part of this is based upon their standardized testing scores. But you would also look at things like getting admitted to college. And then you have standard metrics like attendance in classes and truancy, okay? You have all of those things in which to measure the performance of a given school district. And one of them are called niche scores, NICHE. I'm not quite sure what the acronym stands for, but it's state specific. So the state of Connecticut has its own niche scores and their own ranking. Now with the U.S. News and World Report, we have seen the Guilford public school system decline, all right? Say 15 years ago, they were like about number 20, all right? Over that time, they've gone down, and now they're closer to 35. So that's pretty embarrassing because Guilford is a bedroom community for Yale University. Many of the residents are professors and others who work in the Yale system. So you'd think they put a very high value on their kids doing well. And here's evidence that as time passes, they're doing worse and worse. And the idea that Portrait of a Graduate is helping them is a pure fiction. So, given this, what are we supposed to say? You have, and yeah, what it just, sorry, I mentioned that. So then the niche scores, we've seen Guilford drop. Last testing was around 62% proficiency. Now it's down to 55% proficiency. So that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. But all that you see the administration in Guilford doing is trying to make excuses, point directions, distract the audience, anything but try to say, okay, we're having a problem and we're addressing it. And they will go to incredible lengths, and I mean incredible, to create the impression that they're doing okay when they're not. So to anybody who's thinking of moving to Guilford, go find another school district. You'll be better off. So yes, yeah, part of this I blame on Common Core. But there was an interesting argument. What was it? I'd have to find that article. I mean, the thing to tell you about is that quietly but efficiently, there has been yet another development with respect to the death of the United States Department of Education. So certain programs have been shuttered, certain functions have been transferred, certain monies have been dispensed with, and now the idea that you have this federal organization influencing public education throughout the country, not so much anymore, not so much. And that's a good thing. But now this also puts more pressure on the states to start to perform. We come to Connecticut, and what is their response? Their response is to try and kill homeschooling with this recent bill that was passed. Speaking for myself, it's war. There's going to be a war over homeschooling in Connecticut. You'll see. It's coming soon. So that's that part. And now I want to jump on. What else do I want to jump on? Yes. 70 years. See, the rape gang inquiry in UK was for 70 years. Let me just take a moment, dear audience. All right, so there's the inquiry report. There was a name for this report. I can't remember the name of the person, but yeah. So, boy, if you were around, I could give you the link. So it's about a 200-page report, and it is an absolute condemnation of what happened in England with respect to these rape gangs. Yeah, it's just disgusting. Maybe there'll be some resolution. I'm just not so sure. Okay. And then there's a headline here. So I just told you about how Fauci was found out for having talked with the intelligence agencies with the unfolding of the scamdemic. So now we have the CIA official confirms the agency flip-flopped over COVID-19 origins over a 5-day period. And so who helped them out? That's right, good old Anthony. Yep, gave them all the misinformation they needed. Just disgusting. Yes, let me just see if I can give you something else here that is of note. Yes. That's interesting. Sunscreen, yeah. Anyway, okay, good luck with that. It says here, California, New York to ban 3D printers that make ghost guns. Yeah, guys, that horse already left the barn. Just saying. And, there's a culture out there, and whether California, New York decides to ban it, Pennsylvania won't, Florida won't, Georgia won't. North Carolina won't. South Carolina won't. So this vibrant culture of 3D printing of ghost guns will continue just fine. Thank you very much. And, printing of ghost guns, again, there's so many workaround solutions when it comes to 3D printing. And it's an act of desperation on their part. And it just shows. Let me give you another example. Many years ago, Connecticut passed a law prohibiting the importation of plants that were invasive species. Japanese knotweed, kudzu, and other plants like those. There's just one problem with invasive plants. Once they get started, you're going to have trouble stopping them. And the cases of plants like those, too late. They're already in Connecticut. You're not stopping them. So the notion that you're somehow addressing the problem by banning the importation of plants that are already in the state and spreading, it's stupid. It's typical of the Connecticut legislature as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, but they can try, but the other states, see, not just so-called ghost guns, but just about anything. Yes, the other thing we haven't talked about, so they don't see failing schools as a problem because the goal is an uneducated populace. That would be correct. That is their goal. And so they have to attack homeschooling. This gets into another thing. It would be nice. It would be nice to have yet another study group focus on measuring the performance of homeschooled children versus publicly educated children. And I think there's an irony floating around in there if you look hard enough. On the one hand, if it's about public education, there are fairly clear guidelines called educational standards that inform educators on what to teach, how much of it to teach, and for how long. So, for example, there are these things called Carnegie units. So a Carnegie unit basically says, and to break it down, the state of Connecticut requires that a publicly educated student have 180 hours of instruction. Okay. I think that's right. It's 180 hours. We'll have to double check that, but let's just use that as a number. And that the said student should get 180 days of instruction. All right. And then within each day, they're expected to get 5 hours of instruction: history, math, science, art, music. And so somewhere in there, you get a language as well. And if you do that for 12 years, then you have fulfilled the requirements of a public education and you get your diploma. Okay? So there's a very clear system. But let's be honest, it's a system that has failed horribly. We'll give you one example, okay? The young woman who graduated from some high school got admitted to the University of Connecticut, and who is functionally illiterate. Couldn't read. How do you go to college and not read? You can't. But she was admitted. So what were these people thinking? But there's one level of cynicism that just says, this is how it's going. Okay? She's just the first. Wait for more young people to, quote, graduate from high school who can't read a damn thing, can't do simple math, know nothing about history, know nothing about art. Wow. And this is going to be okay with us? No, it's not. Okay? So let me get to the contradiction. So highly structured, highly regulated system producing terrible results. Over in this corner, homeschooling, less regulated, less structured, but somehow putting out students who are vastly superior. What is the average? We got two things here. The average homeschooled student is 2 years ahead of their peers. So if you're a 14-year-old and you're in the 8th grade and you've been homeschooled, it's going to turn out that your level of competency is the equivalent of a 10th grader. An 8th grader at the 10th grade level, that's pretty good. Now, I've seen stories of other homeschooled families, and the level of achievement is off the charts. It is off the charts. Nobody says anything about it. But let me give you the other more striking example, and I'll deal with the criticism of it. If you follow education, you look at the statistics that the liberals and progressives love to put up over and over again, talking about the evils of the society in which we live, you're going to see the following. Based on standardized test scores, those who score the highest of all, Asian. Next, whites. Next, Hispanics. And then, whoops, I can't even show it on the screen. They score so low. Blacks. Common. Data shows the same results year in and year out. Okay? There can be a lot of explanations for it. We'll get to that. The part that's striking, though, is the research showing what happens when Black students are not publicly educated, but homeschooled. Homeschooled Black kids. Who knew? So let's review. If you include for your standardized testing data on homeschooled Black kids, here's what you get. Top is still Asian. The next layer, wait for it, the next layer of scoring is Black homeschooled children who outperform white kids in public education. Let that sink in. Okay? And yeah, so the problem now is those Black kids at the bottom, they're the ones that are in public education. Okay? Public education is a racial institution screwing up Black kids. Just look at the data. That's all. But the progressives, they keep pointing in different directions and confusing you. They say it's income. They say the parents are not well-educated, whatever. All right, so there is a criticism. You could say that those who are homeschooled Black kids are self-selecting. Okay, so there are families. You have Black families who are motivated for education and those who are not so much. And so if you have Black kids who are in a family that are motivated for education and you homeschool them, they're going to outperform white kids in public education. Anybody listening? Oh, wait, I hear something. Crickets. I hear lots of crickets. Well, pay attention. Okay. I would say if anything is a condemnation of public education, it is that data. I don't care about self-selecting criteria and all that other crap. If you can find a bunch of kids who get together and learn and they're outperforming their peers and they're outperforming white kids as well, that's worth a lot. Okay? That is worth a hell of a lot. And they don't do anything about it. But I just had to share it with you. And yes, the 3D printers. Yeah. So let me just, one last thing. We got to fight for homeschooling. We got to fight to keep it alive and well and flourishing and strong and growing. And I'll just mention that I'm working on a proposal that I think can address some of these other problems with public education. I'll get into that later. But now it's been an hour and 4 minutes of having so much fun. Does this disprove that book about the bell curve? Well, I will say partially. All right. I don't want to address this. Grading creativity can be, shall we say, subjective, okay? But you can still come up with a sense of when you have a student who's pretty creative. There tends to be a correlation between academic subjects and IQ, but I don't think it's a perfect fit. And I think there's some questions about, people basically say IQ tests just measure IQ. So you're not necessarily measuring motivation, you're not measuring the ability to perform, and you're not really measuring learning ability either. You're measuring the ability to perform on certain tests, and that's about it. That said, the evidence is that if a kid has a higher IQ, they're going to tend to do well in life, but we also have plenty of stories of high IQ kids who go on to do nothing with their lives. There are videos about them. So yeah, again, all these things are rough indicators. There's nothing that can really predict, how a kid's going to do whatever his race is. The homeschool kids are better motivated. Yes, there is no question about that. You can see that when children, all right, so it's kind of a tricky thing. There has to be some structure, a certain amount of discipline, okay, but it's built around those things that are motivating a child. There's the extreme case where you've gone too far the other way, and that would be a place called Summerhill. So anybody who's likes to read about education, read about Summerhill. It's a school that still exists in England, and it is an educational environment with zero structure. Kids can stay up as long as they want, and what you end up with are these school meetings, and you got kids that are just like, you stayed up until 2:00 in the morning, you can't pay attention to what anybody's talking about. And that's somehow okay, and they're sitting and saying, well, boys and girls, you really need to get to bed earlier. Yeah, what about the other part, the learning? So the thing is that when you look at Summerhill in the past, I just give me a minute here. I want to tackle this. This is too good to pass up here. Is Summerhill a failure? All right, let's see what they say. Mr. AI says you have to promote self-directed learning, which is unconventional, lacks structure, leading to potential academic gaps. It fosters independence and critical thinking skills that face challenging meeting standardized educational benchmarks. Yeah, that's going to happen. Kids are not going to do well on standardized tests under those circumstances. So in a sense, Summerhill represents an extreme. The article of faith here is when you have children learning, okay, 10 years old, 15 years old. This sounds like the South Harmon Institute of Technology. South Harmon. Never heard of them. Let me just take a quick look and see. I can't resist. Oh, to me, that's hog heaven if it's what I think this is. Technology. Let's see. Harmon. Maybe you meant the Harmon Institute of Technology. South Harmon is a faculty and staff to give students advantage in the workforce or assist business and education. No, that seems more like a conventional WGU. Online? Is that an online group there? Yes, it's from a movie. And was that? Tell me which movie it was, because there are a bunch of movies that, well, I might as well say what it is. Well, no, that's an unfair statement. These movies are dramatizations of situations where you have somebody, whether it's a teacher or a superintendent, who provides firm leadership that leads to kids performing better academically. Of course, you have what's called the Pygmalion effect. Some may or may not know about it. The Pygmalion effect is such a common idea.
Dad,
yeah, what?
Can I ask you something?
Sure, go ahead.
Remember back in April when I went to see The Mummy with Sam,
Yes.
and how I said I was
Yes.
how I said I was disturbed by it.
Sure. Yes.
Was that real, or was it just makeup to make it look like that?
Well, you know that it was made up.
It was makeup to make it look.
Yeah, of course.
But usually a mummy would have bandages on it.
Well, where are you going to start? You're going to look at the very first mummy of the movie that was ever made back in the 30s. Yeah, with Boris Karloff.
But isn't that right? Mummies are usually bandaged.
Yes, that's correct.
But in this movie, the girl was mummified but looked more demon-like.
It's called artistic license.
Were there demons in ancient Egypt? Any ancient culture would have demons.
No, every culture has some concept of a demon, of an evil spirit, of some malevolent influence that's trying to interfere with you.
And that involves, like they say, like tearing a family apart or causing a sickness and the terrible.
You can have that, but there are problems that we have individually that create that.
Right.
Yeah, so it's not just demons. We have our own demons inside. The movie was called Accepted. It was about a bunch of kids who invented their own college. I got to check that out. Now, was that based on something that was real, or was that sort of a cool idea? I mean, you got the Dead Poets Society, you got To Sir with Love, you've got Conrack, you've got Stand and Deliver. Okay, then there was that other one built around music, which I can't think of. But, there was, Dead Poets Society was, what they were doing in terms of the values might have been a little questionable. But the idea was that you can fire up the desire to learn. You can light that fire and it ain't going to go out if you can inspire the kids to be interested in something. And that's something, it's a starting point, okay? Stand and Deliver had more to do with a teacher who was taking a group of Hispanic students and saying, look, everybody thinks you're stupid. Everybody thinks you're incapable of anything, okay? Well, I'm here to prove them wrong. And what he did was he put them through the paces, and they aced those AP courses in calculus. There was a lot of drama, and you could appreciate what these kids are going through at home while they're trying to do well in school. So, that was a different kind of message. Conrack with John Voight was about a small school on an island off of South Carolina. And so here was a teacher who went into this poor school. And because, again, they're an environment of low expectations, and he raised those expectations, and they responded, all right? And I think To Sir with Love was kind of in the same vein. So, all right, so here we understand the Pygmalion effect, yet we don't see it being applied very well. And if anything, we see the opposite being applied. And is it on purpose? Well, Alan, I think you just said it was on purpose. Okay, so all the more reason to tell parents, homeschool your kids, get out of the system. But I think there are other lines of attack. We can get into that later. But right now, I feel the night moving on. It's Saturday night or Sunday night. I've lost track. Saturday. It's Saturday night, and then we got Sunday coming. And there'll be so much to do. Well, I'll be taking the day off tomorrow, but I'll come back Monday. There'll be the podcast. Jason will be back by Tuesday from his vacation. And then we're going to be jumping all over this stuff. We hope to be able to do even more. All right. Thanks for hanging out, guys. I'll talk to you later, Alan. All right. Bye.